Hi everyone, this is Mr. Fokowski, and in part 4 we're going to be looking at state elections. And the first type of state election deals with the gubernatorial elections. And these are very similar to presidential elections. And remember, that sort of makes sense because governors sort of act like presidents. They are the executive branch at the state level. So many of these elections do resemble presidential elections. They have to tour the entire state and they don't represent districts, so everyone in their state is a voter, is a constituent, is important for that person to get elected. Now, oftentimes, when you have gubernatorial elections, this leads to divided government. We've seen this word before. So remember that divided government refers to when you have different parties in control, whether that's the governor or the party that's in charge of the Senate or the House within the state government. And this can also happen at the national level as well. Gubernatorial elections are generally held in even-numbered non-presidential election years, so the governor is the main candidate. One exception to this is actually New Jersey, which holds its elections in 2009. It held it in 2013, and the next one will be in 2017. And although this is an election just at the state level, don't be fooled in thinking that they're less expensive. They are very expensive, and really the onus is on the candidate to raise most of the money themselves. There's going to be limited financial support from the political parties. And remember, this is sort of in the era of when political parties are losing their influence. So candidates are largely responsible for financing and conducting and carrying out their entire campaign. So a lot of candidates for governor who are trying to raise their profile at the state level will go with media advertising in the form of newspaper or television advertising. And when you really crunch the numbers, how much money that is spent, you have millions being spent. And this is shown in your textbook as well. So for example, when you crunch the numbers in Washington state, it comes out to $2.78 per vote. Compare this with a smaller state like New Hampshire, and it comes out to about $10.03 per vote. So a lot of money is being spent in these statewide elections for governor. Now, with state elections at the state legislative level, typically are not that well known. There's not really too much media attention to them. Because if I were to ask you who's your state senator, you probably wouldn't know. You might be able to pick it out with a list of names, but you wouldn't be able to most likely get it off from the top of your head. So state legislators have the smallest constituencies, but ironically, they are not really well known. People don't really pay attention to them. There's not a lot of media coverage. But think of these elections as mirroring the process as congressional candidates. They are typically responsible for financing their own campaign. There's limited help or support from the political parties. So it's just, I guess, a smaller type of congressional election, if you will. But because they're not really all that well known, party identification as well as parties' candidates running for governor and president typically have more of an impact on their race than the actual candidate running for, let's say, the state senator. So they're really subject to these outside factors that they don't really have too much control over. And also dealing with legislative elections, in our last lecture we looked at the Baker v. Carr decision by the Supreme Court with the one person, one vote, so you can't have an unequal number of people in one district versus another district. Every vote should approximately be equal. So overall, with state legislative elections, they are getting more expensive. That's typically the trend. They're more candidate-centered. Political parties are not playing much of a role. And historically, campaigns for these positions have not really all been that competitive or really even that expensive. But now things are getting much more expensive and much more competitive, especially with having equal number districts. In terms of state legislative elections as well, there is partisan competition. As I said, that's increasing. We're seeing more turnover, and a recent phenomenon deals with term limits. But really what we've seen in state legislative elections, especially over the past 20, 30 years, is divided government. We don't really see the same party in control at the House, the Senate, and as the governor. Much of this is very split. Since there's a lot of turnover because of these aforementioned reasons, This is leading to new policy ideas. So you're not always going to have a different policy in place. You might have a different policy every 4 years. So some might say, oh, this is not a really good thing, or some say, well, no, this is how democracy works. Other states have decided to force turnover by simply imposing term limits. So some states say you can only be a state senator for 6 years. Others don't have term limits. It does vary by state. Other states have, such as California, have what's called recall elections. So if you're unhappy with the governor, you can have a statewide recall election where you would basically get rid of that person. You're not going to wait up until that 4 year term limit is up for re-election. You're just going to boot that person out after the first year, but that's very difficult to do. But looking at this graphic right here, you'll see that the balance of power between the governor, the state senate, and the state house, you don't really necessarily see one party in charge. I mean, there are a few exceptions with Alaska and Texas, both very strong Republican strongholds, but typically you see a lot of divided government. Do keep in mind that if you are looking at New Jersey and you see all blue, that's actually now a divided government because Chris Christie is in power and he is Republican, yet the state house and the state senate are both Democrats. So another example of divided power, as this is from 2008. We've also seen state offices change as well with respect to going from the old rule of white male elected leaders to including more women as well as minorities. As of 2008, there were 8 female state governors, and certainly that does not represent the number of females proportionally in the United States, because ideally there would be 25 female governors and 25 male governors, but that certainly is not the case. So progress really has been slow as more and more women are skipping state level offices and running for federal offices. So that also has put a damper on the number of females running in statewide elections. And if you look at female representation in the state government, here you have most states having between 11 and 20% of females serving on some level of office statewide, but many states, again, are lagging behind. Again, you don't really have too many states that have more than 30%, a few notable exceptions such as Maine and Nevada, but most states do underrepresent females in office. And that will conclude our discussion on statewide elections. Thank you very much.